Hi, I'm Arthur Zackwitz, and welcome to Corner Fit's Street Talk, where we share insights about fashion apparel, retail, beauty, technology, retail real estate, and more importantly, answering this key question: what does retail mean to you? So today we welcome David Dorf, who's Global Head of Retail Industry Solutions at Amazon Web Services. David, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So before we hit the record button, for listeners, David and I were just talking about NRF and technology solutions and how it's changed over time. And David, you said something. You spend the week doing one thing, and the weekend comes along, and you start the cycle again.
Yeah, I spend the week talking to customers and helping build solutions, and then the weekend doing all the research to figure out all the new technology that's come out during that week. The pace of change is just so fast now.
The so I think the best place to start, maybe to talk about from an e-commerce perspective. What are some of the challenges and opportunities facing retailers and CPG brands in particular?
Yeah, I think we're past some of the big things like omni-channel and mobile and social, and that's kind of table stakes now. Some of the things that we've been looking at are like speed to market is being really a big thing right now. So retailers need to get products on the website faster with more accurate information. CPGs need to create new products faster, get their product innovation processes down. It's leading to a lot more automation, which isn't necessarily all about AI. AI certainly helps with a lot of that automation, but automation's been around for a while, and we've been helping with speeding up some of those workflows quite a bit. I think another area where we see a lot of opportunity is returns. Just seems like there's an awful lot of returns, especially in the fashion area and apparel. So many people order 3 sizes, return 2, and there goes your margin, right?
Yeah, it's
uh,
it's the bracketing, right? They bracket their sizes, and then
yeah, it's not good. I used to be a retailer when I was with Circuit City,
oh
and
yeah,
before the Super Bowl, everybody would get a new TV, show the Super Bowl on their TV, and then return it,
bring it back.
which was a huge problem for us. So returns have been around for a long time, but I think it's getting to be a little bit worse of an issue, and we are finding new ways to address returns, like things like virtual try-on and having more videos around products or 3D versions of products to help people really understand the product a little better. Gives them more confidence in the buy and helps reduce some of those returns. So that's a big area. I think in general, just experience
Right.
is always a big thing around the marketing side. So most retailers now have good CDPs and they're starting to do really good personalization. We're starting to see more retail media networks and interest in how they can monetize ads. Very big area. Fulfillment options. So, retailers that have stores have the option of doing fulfillment from stores, which can be cost effective and get products to customers quickly, which is really great. And then after sale support. We have a product called Amazon Connect, which is our call center app. And we've added all sorts of new features to that to really help customers do chats or be live or use AI to get information about stores or returns or where's my order? I want to make an adjustment. Um, but I think the really big thing right now is around search and product discovery,
Mhm.
on-site and off. I think we've had this keyword and faceted search set up for a long time, and people are now wanting more natural language interactions, and that's really the biggest thing I see right now.
What is the all right, I'm a retailer and I'm a little late to the game. I want to use AI. Where do I start? And, well, what's out there? Who do I partner with? How do I begin? And what are my expectations? Like, what kind of ROI should I expect?
Yeah, so I kind of divide the world of AI into two sides. There's agentic commerce, so kind of the e-commerce front end and how we're now using AI to enhance the shopping experience online. And then there's what I call the invisible AI, the AI that's in all of your processes to help you be more efficient. So in the merchandising side and supply chain, marketing, both of those areas are big areas to dive into. On the agentic front, I think there are lots of opportunities for retailers to interact with answer engines. So
Hmm.
lots of people are now shopping in ChatGPT or using Gemini or maybe Perplexity. Um, and so it's really important for retailers to have their products represented on those answer engines. So when someone says, hey, I need a really good mountain bike in the Colorado area, what do you recommend for a starter? Your products get represented in that answer that comes back from the answer engine. I think this natural language answer engine is starting to be used quite a bit by the masses. And so we want to make sure that we're where the people are for shopping. And so it's important to get your stuff represented there. And there's several ways to do that. There's Agentic Commerce Protocol from OpenAI. There's a Universal Commerce Protocol from Google. Gemini has their own setup. Amazon even has a product feed that was just announced last week to support their direct shopping. So there's lots of ways to interact on that side of things and to make sure that your products are represented.
The going back to the shopping experience, what do consumers expect from a shopping experience, whether it's online or in store? Or, you mentioned kind of the data that's needed to make sure that your answers are correct. What is
Yeah.
yeah, what is that? What do they expect?
I think if we go way back, let's say to the 40s or 50s, we were talking dime stores and stuff like that. The shopkeeper knew you, knew what you liked, knew your preferences, knew how often you
Mhm.
needed certain items, and was very helpful, right? And really, something new came in. They said, "Hey, I know you're interested in this sort of thing. You love hats. I'm going to show you this hat." It was a very personal experience, and it was a little bit easier to discover products. And then we started to scale and started to go with big chains and all that kind of stuff, and we sort of lost a lot of that. We started adding personalization into the mix. So starting to keep track of people's purchases and browse history in order to understand their intent a little bit better and make better recommendations. And we did okay with that, but it wasn't quite the same experience. And we're starting to get to that experience with AI and these answer engines where you really can have a conversation. You really can say, compare these three products for me, and it'll go
Right.
back and forth and compare them. I used to work at Circuit City, and we used to have people come in all the time. I don't know what kind of router I need. Uh, you know, eh, Most people don't. So you sit down and you show them the different types of routers and how big is your square footage and are you an apartment or a house, all that kind of good stuff. That's the sort of interaction that we need more of. And I think AI is availing that both in the store and online. Online, certainly with chatbots, but in the store, we're also doing clienteling with associates and giving them hints and suggestions on how to answer questions from customers, how to do better training, et cetera. So I think AI is having a big impact on the shopper experience now.
What is model context protocol, and how is it being used from a unified commerce perspective?
Wow, now you're getting technical, huh? Okay. So,
Yeah, what it is.
MCP
Like, what does that? I had to read it twice. I mean, that sounds important.
Yeah, MCP is a standard that a company that kinda leads in AI called Anthropic came up with.
Oh, Anthropic, yeah.
Yeah, basically, what was happening was these answer engines they're trained on data, statically up to a date, and anything after that, they don't really know the answers. So you have to augment the data. And so we would, point them to a database or point them to websites to get real-time data to augment their consideration when they're giving an answer. And there's no standard around that, and it got to be a little bit hard. So Anthropic came up with this MCP, which is basically a way to advertise capabilities. So you could say, okay, I'm going to go to a weather MCP server to look up the weather. So when you ask an answer engine, hey, I'm going to fly to Jamaica next week, what should I wear? That
Mm.
answer engine can use MCP to look up the weather in Jamaica for next week and make some really good recommendations for you. So MCP is a way to expose data in a standard way to answer engines that they can then use to make better answers.
The I guess retail CIOs are shifting away from being considered the cost center manager to the revenue orchestrator, right? So, how do you can you walk us through a little bit about maybe through like a practical example of how agentic workflows in AWS are managing the messy middle part of that? Regarding like dynamic pricing or real time inventory rebalancing. Like, how does that work?
Yeah, we mentioned NRF earlier. We had a couple really good demos in our NRF booth this past year that got a lot of attention, and one of them was around pricing. So we built a demonstration that used several agents that collaborated together to determine the price for a brand new item. So you've got a new item that you want to list on your site, and the first agent goes off and tries to figure out what the demand forecast for that item might be. And typically we do something called cold start, where we look at a similar item and figure out from its past sales, what can we expect for this particular item. And then we had another agent go and look at publicly available competitor information on the web to see what similar items are priced at in the market, pull all that data together. And then there's a third agent that says, okay, what role is this particular product going to play in your product portfolio? So is it a loss leader? Is it, your top of the line? That helps determine the margins that we need to understand. And we need to understand the cost of that item, both for building the item and the landed cost for, shipping and all that kind of stuff. So these agents collect all this information and pass it off to a controlling agent who looks at all the information and says, you should price this item at X. And then it gives you all the information. Here's the range where I found it for your competitors in the market. Here are the different margins you can expect based on the demand we believe you're going to have. You're going to sell this many and it's going to be this profitable. All that work is typically done by a merchant or a pricing analyst. And we were able to do it all through 3 agents working together. And it ran for about 10 minutes
Wow.
to figure that out. So that's the sort of expectation you can have. And this isn't by any means where I would say we would replace the analyst. The analyst uses this information to then make the final decision. And it makes it possible for that analyst to price a lot more things every day, so they can do their job much more efficiently. I'd hate to say that, we're off to an autonomous area where these things can go off on their own, because I don't think we're quite ready for that yet. There's still mistakes made and things like that. It's getting fewer and fewer, but it's really cool to see some of these processes augmented so that people don't have to do kind of what we call the undifferentiated heavy lifting, just over and over stuff. That was a great demo that we had. And we had a second one around supply chain that was similar. Basically, we said, hey, this inbound ship has all your items on it, but it's been delayed. And with the news of the day, that's no surprise.
Right.
So if it's delayed a week, how does that impact things? So we have an agent go through and figure out where those items were meant to go, what stores, what distribution centers. If they're not there, what's the impact? And then what are the alternatives? Can I source from another vendor? Can I airlift it in? Can I do some transfers from other areas of the country that maybe don't have such a high demand for that item? And it runs through all the scenarios and then presents them back and says, well, you can do A, B, or C, and here's your likely outcomes for each. And let the supply chain person make that decision. So there again, agents are really augmenting a process that a person would use much faster, pulling data together much more quickly so that you can make more accurate decisions faster.
The I read somewhere a couple of weeks ago that agents are they're getting together, they're talking to one another. I don't know if you saw that or not. It's kind of fun. I don't think they're going out for drinks or bowling yet, but apparently
It's
they're.
probably not that far off.
But regarding autonomous commerce, if there's a blip, I think you said it probably happens, but it's getting better. It could really ruin the relationship between the brand and the consumer. So how do you prevent that? What are some of the guardrails?
Yeah, in fact, we have a product called Amazon Bedrock Guardrails, which helps do that. One of the things you can do is you can, for example, upload policies. And then when an LLM makes a suggestion, we check it against the policies to make sure it's within policy. So a great example of that in retail might be something like your return policies. So if you've got, say, a chatbot on your website and people are asking questions, how do I return this? It's past 30 days, whatever. The chatbot can come up with an answer, and then we double check it against the written policies to make sure that it's not going out of bounds of those policies. So it can be a problem. I recall it was probably 6 months ago, there was an airline that had an issue like this where their chatbot told somebody that they got a bereavement discount, and they actually didn't. And it was
Oops.
a whole mess to unravel, right?
Mhm.
So you definitely don't want that sort of issue to occur. But there's been a lot of progress in the training of LLMs and the way we do prompting, and then putting these guardrails around them that we can really minimize a lot of these problems.
The Doing research for this interview, I read another. I have no idea what this means. Model context protocol, and apparently, I think historically you would move as a product as a developer or designer, you'd move from like a pilot to full production. It took months to do. How does that change using your solutions?
Yeah, so the standards like MCP certainly help with that for sure. The other thing, I mean, we noticed this as well. We have a product called Amazon Bedrock, which basically provides the infrastructure for a large language model. And you can pick one of many large language models that we support, both open source and proprietary. So if somebody, for example, wants to use Claude, which is the Anthropic model, they can do that, but then they can switch and maybe choose Llama from Meta later on, and you can just switch that within Bedrock very easily without making a lot of other changes. But we were having people in what we call POC purgatory. They do their proof of concept and could never quite get into production. And as we noticed this, we started building a new product called Agent Core, which really builds out the security that's necessary, the scalability, and the flexibility that's necessary to be able to bring these things very quickly from proof of concept into production. So the key thing for us is stability. So production ready infrastructure and security is key. So we want to, and most people skip a lot of that during a proof of concept, but if you use Agent Core from the start, that's built in. And so that gives you a lot of scale. So you know that if it works well in your proof of concept, when you bring it to production, it'll scale up very well. The second thing is adaptability. So a lot of different developers like to use different tools. So they might use something like Crew AI or LangGraph or something like that, or even our Strands agents. They're different technologies for building agents, and we support them all. So those libraries can be used within our framework. So it's adaptable, it's flexible. Developers can choose the right way to go. So by doing this, it really allows retailers to develop these agents much more quickly and test them quickly as a proof of concept, and then get them into production once they've passed the proof of concept stage.
You mentioned about the AE and answers and like
Yep.
hyper local. I guess is it's kind of sort of the same thing. Like knowing down, like as a consumer, like what are the social trends that I could be experiencing? Is that integrated into the solution?
So when we talk about AEO, that's or answer engine optimization. So that goes back to how do I make sure that my products are represented within an answer engine when a question's been asked about them? So there's a few things that can be done as large language models are trained. They use the corpus of the internet to collect all this shopping data. And one of the interesting things is where they get their data. So obviously they try to get it from websites. They have crawlers that go get your product catalog, but a lot of retailers block those crawlers. And sometimes there's inaccuracy, but an awful lot of data comes from strange places like Reddit and
Oh,
YouTube and places like that. So having like your products included in top 10 lists in Reddit, or having YouTube videos talking about how to use your product or what your product looks like, haul videos, whatever, those types of things help raise the ranking of your product within an answer engine's own graph. So when it makes recommendations, it can do that. So the other thing that we should talk a little bit about is this notion of trust, which you're kind of bringing up with some of these other things. There's also a bunch of standards being built around payments. So agentic payments. So for example, Visa and MasterCard have standards. I think PayPal's doing something. Stripe's working with OpenAI on theirs. When you purchase something through an answer engine, you're giving that AI your credit card number, and you want to be able to have the trust that it's going to purchase exactly what you want, when you want, for the price you want. And so these standards are being built to verify the cardholder's intent, and they're signed for security reasons so that that can't be stolen. And you can put limits on how much an AI can spend on your behalf. So we're starting to explore some of those areas around trust and payments, which I think is pretty interesting because it opens up a whole can of worms with returns. So let's say the AI bought something on your behalf and you decide you don't like it. you go back, and try to return it, this could be a whole new set of return scenarios that retailers have to worry about. Is it the credit card's fault? Is it the answer engine's fault? Is it the person's fault that this thing was bought on your behalf without your permission, or maybe you forgot or whatever? So we're really trying to nail down the trust factor there to make sure that AIs have the right permissions and everything is signed so that we know that that AI does in fact represent your purchase intent.
The last question, we ask this of all our guests now. What does retail mean to you, like on a personal level?
I think I've been doing retail to some extent for 20 or 25 years. For me, I think the exchange of goods to really make a person's life better is an important thing. We always want to make sure that they get the right product at the right price. And I think it's really important that retailers focus on helping people get what they want to live their best life possible. My son was shoe shopping and there were some limits on colors. And he's like, well, I guess I'll take this other color. I'm like, you know what? You're not going to be happy with that. And, you should spend a little extra and let's figure out a way to get, the right shoe for you because it's going to make you happy. So I think retailers are key to making sure that people get what they want and feel better about themselves.
David, thank you so much for joining us today, and thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you.